11 specialists had read Margaret Lawson's file. Her neurologist, her physical therapist, 3 independent consultants hired by lawyers who billed by the sixth of an hour, 6 members of a board of directors who paid a firm $400 an hour to tell them what was in it. Not one of them read to page 47. Not one of them noticed what was missing. Daniel Carr sat down on the 742 crosstown bus one Tuesday morning in March with a packed lunch and a 40-minute commute and found that file sitting under his seat. He read it because he had to find out who to return it to. He kept reading because something on page 12 didn't match page 41, and in his line of work, discrepancies got people hurt. What happened next changed a story everyone thought was already finished. If this pulled you in, tap like right now and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this one travels. The file was thick. Legal weight paper, tab dividers, a spine of rubber bands that had given up and sat loose around the outside. Daniel almost left it where it was. He almost pressed the button for the next stop, stood up, filed off the bus, and let the driver deal with it at the end of the route, the way drivers dealt with everything else people left behind. Umbrellas, grocery bags. The occasional sleeping passenger who missed their stop and woke up in the yard confused and cold. He had seen all of these on this line in the 2 years he had been riding it. But the bus was moving, and he was already seated, and the file was sitting there in the gap between the seat and the wall at a particular angle that put the top page directly in his line of sight. He looked at it for 2 stops without meaning to. Then he reached across and picked it up. The top sheet was a cover letter. Lawson v. Hargrove, et al. Legal brief for competency hearing, Margaret A. Lawson, attached, medical evaluations 111, board resolution draft, neurological summary. He turned it over. On the back, in handwriting so precise it looked almost printed, if found, please return to ClearPath Systems, 14th floor, Meridian Center, Indianapolis. Do not read. This document contains privileged medical and legal information. Daniel Carr read it anyway. Not all of it. That would have taken the rest of the week. But enough. Enough to know the woman whose name was on the cover had been in a wheelchair for 3 years, following a diving accident at a company retreat in Michigan. Enough to know she had built a logistics software company from a rented office and 3 developers into something that now employed 200 people and served clients across 11 states. Enough to know that a man named Owen Hargrove, her co-founder and the current chair of her board, had filed for a formal competency review under the terms of their original shareholder agreement, arguing that the injury and its aftermath had materially compromised her ability to lead, and enough to know that 11 medical evaluations, gathered over 3 years, were being submitted as evidence that Margaret Lawson could no longer run ClearPath Systems. He stopped at page 12. Then he went back to the cover sheet and read that again. He was not a lawyer. He was not a doctor. He was a maintenance supervisor for a commercial property management company called Hallmark Facilities, which managed 9 mid-size office buildings in the Indianapolis metro area, including a building called Meridian Center. He had a mechanical engineering certificate from a community college in Columbus, Ohio, 12 years of practical experience with HVAC systems, plumbing, electrical panels, and the particular kind of diagnostic problem-solving that happened when a building started behaving in ways it wasn't designed to. He was 35 years old. He had a daughter named Piper, who was 7 years old, and who drew portraits of everyone she met and kept a nature journal that was currently dominated by observations about caterpillars. He had been getting through his days in the specific, careful way a person got through their days when they had lost the person who made getting through them feel easy. Not struggling, exactly. Just moving with the particular deliberateness of someone who was aware of the weight and had decided that acknowledging it was not the same as being stopped by it. He got off at the Meridian Center stop. He had been planning to anyway. It was Tuesday, and Tuesdays he covered the 7th and 14th floors. He held the file against his side like it was something that might slip away if he wasn't attentive to it. The lobby of Meridian Center smelled like recycled air and machine-polished marble, and the security desk was staffed by a man named Ron, who had been there for 11 years and who knew Daniel by name, by the toolbox he carried, by the particular order in which he tended to check the floors. Ron was a man who had information about everyone in the building and shared none of it, which made him extremely good at his job and pleasant to work near. Daniel asked him for a minute and set the file on the counter. "Clearpath is on 14, right? Has been for 4 years." Ron said. "You delivering something? Returning it. Found it on the bus this morning. Can you call up and let them know I'm coming?" Ron made the call. Daniel waited. He looked at the atrium, the long skylight 3 stories above. The ficus trees at the far wall that he had always suspected were plastic and had never gotten close enough to confirm. He was still thinking about page 12. The elevator opened on the 14th floor to a space that felt different from the other floors he managed. Clean lines, frosted glass, the particular design language of a company that wanted you to know it was successful without having to say so. A receptionist with the practiced efficiency of someone who managed a great many first impressions asked his name, gave him a visitor badge, and walked him down a hallway that ended at a glass-walled conference room. And that was where he first saw Margaret Lawson. She was at the end of a long table, laptop open, phone to her ear, a yellow legal pad covered in red annotations in front of her. She was 34 years old. Dark hair cut short in a way that was deliberate rather than easy. A white blouse, a gray blazer. The blazer slightly more formal than the hour called for, which he would later understand was a deliberate choice, the way a person dressed when they were going to be observed, and had decided exactly how they wanted to be seen. She moved the wheels of her chair with one hand while she wrote with the other, a coordination so practiced that it looked like nothing at all, like the chair was simply part of the way she moved through the world. Which it was. The phone call was nearly finished. She looked up and saw Daniel in the doorway and assessed him with the particular expression of someone deciding whether an interruption was going to cost them something they couldn't afford to lose. She finished the call, set the phone down, the file. She said it without inflection, as though she had been expecting exactly this, or something like it. Under the seat on the 742 Crosstown. He stepped forward and set it on the table in front of her. "I came straight here." She did not touch it immediately. She looked at it with an expression he couldn't fully read, and then she looked at him, and the look she gave him was the same careful look he had seen engineers use when they were trying to determine whether a structural report was telling them the complete truth or the convenient truth. "Did you read it?" "I looked at it to find out who to return it to." Her jaw set. "Looked at it. I read enough to know this building was where it needed to go." She pulled the file toward her, opened it to the middle section, checked something against a count he couldn't follow, and closed it again. Then she looked at him with the flat, measured assessment of someone who was not going to say thank you before she understood what she was thanking him for. "Thank you." She said it the way people said things they were obligated to say. The words accurate, but the weight absent. "You can leave the visitor badge with the front desk." He started to say something else, and then stopped. He was thinking about the discrepancy he had noticed, the missing attachment on page 47, the clinical note from a Dr. Elaine Marsh that was referenced but not included. He had noticed it the way he noticed a maintenance report that referenced a repair not logged in the work order system. A small thing. The kind of small thing that was probably nothing. Except that in 12 years of work, the small things that were probably nothing were almost always the things that needed to be looked at twice. He left the file. He left the badge at the front desk. He spent the rest of Tuesday doing what he had come to Meridian Center to do. The HVAC unit on the 7th floor was running a slightly different pressure cycle than it should have been, which was the kind of thing that became an expensive repair in 6 months if you let it go, and a cheap fix today if you didn't. The water pressure on 12 was low, a partially closed valve 2 floors up, which took 20 minutes to find and 4 seconds to fix. The east stairwell door on the 14th floor had a sensor that had been tripping the alarm twice a week for a month, which was annoying enough that 3 separate tenants had submitted complaints, and which turned out to be a loose wire that cost him 40 minutes and a replacement connector from his truck kit. He worked through all of it with the same attention he brought to every job. He did not think about the file. He thought about the file on the bus home. He thought about it while he made dinner, pasta with the jarred sauce and the cucumber salad that Piper would eat without complaint, which was the criterion he had been using for weekday dinners for the past 2 years. He thought about it at 11 o'clock when Piper was asleep, and he was at the kitchen table with a cup of tea he had forgotten to drink while it was warm, looking at the photo he had taken of the cover sheet on his phone. Because she had said don't read it, and he had read it anyway, and the least he owed her was to understand whether there was a reason it mattered to someone who worked in her building. What he had noticed was this. Page 12 of the legal brief listed the 11 medical evaluations that Owen Hargrove's team was submitting as evidence of Margaret Lawson's diminished capacity. The list included evaluations from 10 of the 11 specialists named on the cover sheet, but it did not include Dr. Elaine Marsh. Dr. Marsh was listed on the cover sheet as the attending neurologist. Her evaluation was described on page 47 as the most recent, completed 6 weeks prior. It was the most current piece of medical evidence in the entire file, and it was not on the list of submissions. The brief cited evaluations 1 through 10. Dr. Marsh's report was labeled Evaluation 11. Referenced on page 47, see attached, and then the attachment field was blank. Maybe the report had been submitted separately. Maybe this was a working draft and the filed version was complete. Maybe there was an entirely reasonable explanation he wasn't able to see from where he was sitting. Probably all 3 of those things were true. He put his phone face down and went to bed. He went back to the bus terminal the next morning before his shift. He told the dispatcher at the transit office that he had found a document on the 742 Tuesday crosstown and had returned the main file to the owner, but thought there might be additional loose material left behind. A separate envelope, loose pages. Could someone check the bus? The dispatcher looked at him for a long moment. The look of someone assessing whether this was going to generate more paperwork than it was worth, and then made a call. A driver named Terrence came in from the yard and told him they had found a small white envelope under the same seat when they swept the bus at the end of Tuesday's route. Terrence hadn't turned it in because it was sealed and weighed nothing, and he figured it was probably junk. It was a plain interoffice envelope, inside a single sheet of paper folded in thirds. Daniel read it standing at the transit office counter while Terrence poured himself a coffee from the break room. He read it the way he read everything technical, for structure first, then detail. The handwriting at the top, Re. M. Lawson, March 12, addendum to full report. Below that, 3 dense paragraphs. He was not trained in medical reading, but he moved through the paragraphs the way he moved through an unfamiliar building schematic, looking for the load-bearing elements before trying to understand the finish work. The final paragraph summarized residual motor pathway activity identified in lower extremities, inconsistent with prior classifications. Prior imaging protocols insufficient for complete assessment of injury grade. Recommend full reclassification evaluation and pathway mapping before any competency determination proceeds. Patient not counseled on findings pending legal clearance. Signed, Dr. Elaine Marsh, M.D., Neurology, March 12. He stood there with the page in his hand and thought about the list on page 12 that ended at Evaluation 10. About the blank attachment slot on page 47, about the particular care he had seen in her face when she looked at the file, about the space between Evaluation 11 is complete and Evaluation 11 is pending, 2 different words, 2 different states, and the question of which version was true. He folded the page back into the envelope. He went to ClearPath Systems. The receptionist on 14 knew his face by now. She called ahead, which meant Margaret Lawson knew he was coming and had made a decision about what to do with that information before the elevator doors opened. He was shown into her office this time, not the conference room. Smaller, a desk positioned to face the window, her back half turned when he came in, the Indianapolis skyline behind her pale and particular in the March light. She turned. The expression she wore was less readable than the day before. More deliberate. She had prepared for this. What did you forget? She said it like a door held slightly open. He put the envelope on the desk. She looked at it. She looked at him. This was separate, he said, loose under the same seat. The bus terminal held it until this morning. She looked at the envelope for a long time without touching it. The kind of pause that was not indecision. The opposite of indecision. What's in it? A medical note. Dr. Elaine Marsh. It's the attachment that's missing from page 47. He watched her face go through something swift and complete, the way a calculation resolved before the person was ready for the answer. She picked up the envelope and opened it and read the single page, and when she was done, she set it face down on the desk and looked at the window. Not at anything in particular, at the space. How much did you read? Enough to understand what it says, he said. Enough to understand why it matters. She was very still. He had seen that kind of stillness before. In systems under load. The quiet that happened right before something either held or gave. You're the facilities supervisor for this building. She said it without looking at him, and it was not a question. She had looked him up between yesterday and today. Yes, this is the second time you've come back with something you had no obligation to return. He said nothing. She turned the page face up. Read it again. This time, her hand on the desk had a slight tension in it she was managing without fully managing. I was told this report wouldn't be ready for another 2 weeks. She said it quietly, like a fact she was still deciding how to classify. It's been done for 6. He didn't ask who had told her that. He could construct a reasonable answer from the name on the cover letter. She looked up. The expression on her face was different from the day before. That one had been managed. This one was something rawer that she hadn't had time to cover, because she hadn't been expecting it. You're going to have to leave, she said. And this isn't personal. Okay, he stood. I need to make some calls. She was already reaching for the phone. He left. He took the stairs. He had a water heater on 11, a lighting issue on 7, a report to file before 4. He did all of them methodically and in order, and when he left the building at 4:47, the elevator opened in the lobby as he was crossing to the exit, and Margaret Lawson came out of it. Alone, briefcase across her lap, the envelope now inside a larger folder, her chin at a particular angle that he was beginning to recognize. She saw him and did not look away. He held the lobby door for a moment, not the elevator, which had already closed. He stepped back. She came across the lobby. They stood for a moment with Ron's security desk 20 feet away, and Ron very professionally not watching any of this. Why did you come back? She asked. You could have called. He thought about it honestly. I drove a bus route for 2 years after college. He said, we had a policy. Lost items, you deliver them directly to the owner when you can. Anything else and they disappear. That's not why. He looked at her. No, he said. I noticed the missing page. I thought you should have it. She held the folder against her like something she was studying. Why does it matter to you? It doesn't. He said, but it matters to you. She looked at him for a long time. The look had something in it that hadn't been there before. He filed it without trying to name it. Thank you, she said. And this time it was the real word. Not the obligatory one. The actual one. He nodded. He pushed through the lobby door into the March cold. The wind came off White River 2 blocks east, the kind of cold that reminded you spring wasn't settled yet. And he walked to the bus stop and did not look back. The next 3 weeks were ordinary. That was the part he would think about later, the way they just went on being ordinary while something underneath them shifted. He went to Meridian Center on his regular rotation. He checked the units on 14, replaced a break room light fixture that had been flickering for 2 weeks, fixed a drafty seal on the window in the 3rd conference room that someone had submitted a complaint about in February and that nobody had gotten around to until now. He saw Margaret Lawson at a distance twice. Once crossing the main office with a phone to her ear and a document in her free hand, moving the chair with the absent ease of someone who was doing 3 other things at once. Once in the corridor with Theo and 2 other people, all of them standing close and talking in the low tones of people mid-problem solving. She did not acknowledge him beyond the small nod that was a professional courtesy extended to the person who had recently fixed the break room. Nothing more. Nothing less. He told himself this was how it was supposed to be. He thought about the envelope on the bus home. He thought about it in the evenings after dinner when Piper was doing her homework at the kitchen table. The math she found interesting and the reading comprehension she found tedious, and the nature journal she kept entirely voluntarily, documenting whatever she had noticed outside that day with a seriousness that he found genuinely moving. And the apartment had the particular quiet it had learned to be. not empty, shaped differently than it used to be. The way a room settled after you moved the furniture, except in this case the room was his life, and the furniture was everything that had been Kara's, and the settling had been 2 years and was still, some mornings, unfinished. He thought about Dr. Marsh's note and what residual motor pathway activity actually meant. He had looked it up. He was not a medical reader, but he understood systems. And what the note described was a system that everyone had concluded was not functioning, based on assessments that the note itself said were conducted with inadequate tools. And that was in fact still sending signals. The question that the note posed was whether those signals could be worked with, whether anyone had even tried. He thought it was possible that nobody had told her the full weight of that. He thought about whether to say something and decided it was not his to say. Dr. Marsh had told her. The note was in her hands. What she did with it was hers to decide. What he could do was his job. He did his job. He was in the break room on the 4th week, making a note about the refrigerator compressor that was running 2 degrees warm and would need attention in the next month if they wanted to avoid a full replacement, when she came in and poured coffee and stood at the counter with the cup held in both hands like she was drawing warmth from it directly through the ceramic. She was in the blue blazer today. The one she wore on Tuesdays he had noticed, which meant she had a standing meeting on Tuesday afternoons and had learned what meetings required what armor. "Have you ever had to fight for something that was already supposed to be yours?" she said. She said it to the counter. Not to him exactly. More like thinking out loud, and he happened to be the nearest solid surface. He thought about the year after Kara died. About the conversations with Kara's parents. Gentle conversations. Careful conversations. Conversations where nobody said anything outright offensive, and yet by the end of them he understood clearly what was being implied, which was that a single man on a maintenance supervisor's salary in a 2-bedroom apartment in Indianapolis was perhaps not the optimal environment for a 5-year-old girl. About the weight of standing in those conversations and being clear and being steady, and not losing his temper, and not losing Piper. About proving sufficient over and over in rooms that had already decided the answer before he walked in. Once, he said. She drank the coffee. She was looking at something outside the window, the April sky going from morning to midday, a crane on the building under construction 2 blocks east moving material that was too far away to identify. "He told me," she said. "Owen, after the accident, when I was still in the rehab facility. He came and he sat in that room and he said, 'You don't have to do this alone anymore.' He said, 'Whatever you need.' He looked at me and meant it. I believe he meant it." What changed? She was quiet for a moment. "I kept running it," she said. "From the hospital, from the rehab facility, from my apartment when I came home. I ran the company the whole time. Every day. Same decisions, same hours, same calls." He thought I would step back, that the accident would give me permission to step back, and that stepping back was the rational, wise, graceful thing to do, and he would be there to help me do it. She turned the cup slowly in her hands. "And when I didn't," she said, "I think he decided the Margaret who wouldn't step back wasn't the real one, that the real one would have known her limits, that the version still sitting at the head of the table was something new, something that didn't understand its own situation. And once he decided that, she paused. Once he decided it, he held on to it. Because changing your mind requires admitting you were wrong about someone you thought you knew well, and that's hard. He wasn't sure what to say. So he said the thing that was simply true. He sounds like a man who made a decision about who you are before you finished being who you are." She looked at him sharply. Then the sharpness softened into something more considered, like she was checking whether the sentence was accurate and finding that it was. "Theo says something like that." Theo was her executive assistant, the man in his early 30s with the particular efficiency of someone who had learned to be indispensable without being noticed. Daniel had spoken to him a handful of times in the context of work orders and building access. He had the impression of someone paying quiet, careful attention to everything. What does Theo say? That Owen's mistake is the assumption that the accident happened to him too. She set the cup down. She was looking at the window, not at Daniel. "I have to go. Board call in 4 minutes. He fixed the refrigerator compressor. She passed by while he was rerouting a network cable the following week, a cable that had been run over a heat source instead of under the floor plate where it belonged, the kind of shortcut installation that seemed fine until it wasn't. And she stopped. "You always redo things that were done wrong," she said. "Yeah," he said. "Why? Because the wrong way costs someone later," he said. "Usually more than doing it right would have cost in the first place." She was quiet for a moment. There was something working behind her eyes. Then she moved on. He thought about that exchange for the rest of the afternoon. The wrong way cost someone later. He thought about it in connection with page 12 and the attachment slot on page 47 and the February version of the brief versus the version that had been submitted to the court. He thought about the specific words, pending and complete, and what it would cost someone if the difference between them was never noticed. He thought about that exchange for the rest of the afternoon. He thought about it doing the floor 6 sensor check and the water heater on 11 and the quarterly maintenance report he wrote up in the parking lot before he left. The wrong way cost someone later. He thought about it in connection with the words pending and complete, about the specific cost of using the wrong word in a document that a board of directors would use to make a decision about someone's life. The following Tuesday he arrived at 7:15, ahead of his schedule, which was unusual enough that Ron noticed and did not comment, which was the highest form of tact. He did the floor 7 work first, as he always did on Tuesdays, the particular order of things that had become a habit without being decided. And then he went up to 14. She was already in her office. She was always already in her office on the mornings he arrived early. He had started to understand that her hours were not the hours of someone who couldn't sleep. They were the hours of someone who had learned that the early morning was the only part of the day she could fully control, before the calls and the board communications and the operational decisions that arrived in waves and required her to be 10 things at once. The early morning was just her and the city and the work, and she guarded it with the precision of someone who knew exactly what it cost them. He did his checks on the floor without disturbing her. He adjusted the temperature control on the east side of the building, which had been running 2 degrees warmer than the setting since February, and which had generated 3 separate complaints from 3 separate offices over the past month. He logged it, adjusted the calibration, logged that. He replaced a burned bulb in the accessible restroom, which was a 30-second job, and submitted the procurement order for the 2 spare bulbs the supply room was now short. Small things. The right way. He passed her doorway twice without stopping. On the 3rd pass, she looked up. "You're here early," she said. "Early job," he said. She looked at him for a moment with the assessing expression, the one that was trying to determine whether something was what it presented itself as. Then she went back to her work. He went to the mechanical room on 14 to do the monthly intake on the primary conduit panel, the one he had rerouted in April, the one that had been done wrong and was now done right. He pulled the log, checked the readings, wrote the notation that would become part of the maintenance history of the building, the record of what had been corrected, and when and why. That was the job, the record of what needed correcting. An hour later, Theo appeared in the mechanical room doorway, with a cup of coffee and the look of someone who had something to say and was deciding whether to say it. Daniel nodded. "She hasn't eaten yet," Theo said. "She was here at 5. She has the board communications thing at 10, which she's been prepping for since yesterday." He looked at the cup. If someone were to happen to leave a breakfast item from the 4th floor kitchen on the break room counter, it would probably be eaten before 10. He noted this. He stopped in the break room kitchen on his way back from the conduit check and found the muffins that the building management kept stocked on the east counter and left 2 of them on the small plate near the coffee station that he had noticed was the one she used. He did not mention this to her. He found out later from Theo that she had eaten them. Theo mentioned it in the same way he mentioned most things, without looking at Daniel directly, as a fact being offered to the room. The weeks built on each other that way. Small adjustments. Small things done right. Nothing announced, nothing claimed. She started leaving notes more regularly, not just about maintenance issues, though there were those too. Once a note about a specific vendor she had heard was doing work in an adjacent building, and whether Daniel had worked with them before, and what his assessment was of their reliability. Once a note about the parking situation on the east side of the building during the late afternoon, which had been creating a bottleneck that the accessible parking row was absorbing, and whether something could be done. He addressed both. He reported back through the work order system the way he was supposed to, and also through a note left on the mechanical room door the way they had apparently decided was acceptable. He thought about the photograph from the file, the one now propped on the corner of her monitor. He thought about the woman in it, arms out, the ease of her. He thought about the woman at the desk writing in red ink. He did not say to himself that they were the same person, because she had already said that herself, and it was hers to hold, not his to repeat. One evening in the 5th week, he was finishing the end-of-day check on 14 later than he had planned. A stuck damper on the ventilation system had taken 2 hours instead of 45 minutes. The kind of job that revealed itself to be more than it appeared once you opened it up, and the floor had gone quiet around him. Most of the ClearPath staff having gone home, the lights on the motion sensors beginning to cycle to their after-hours setting. He passed her office. She was still there. She was on the phone, but it was the kind of phone call where she was listening more than speaking, holding the handset and making occasional marks on the legal pad, and she did not look up when he passed. He finished the check. He logged it. He waited for the elevator. Behind him, the corridor was dark except for the motion sensor light near her office, and the light from her window. The city was lit outside. He stood at the elevator and thought about the kind of person who was still working at 7:45 because there was still work to be done, and it was her work, and she had decided to do it, and nothing about that was complicated. The elevator came. He got in. He thought about that on the bus home, about what it cost a person to be reliable in that particular thorough way, about what it took to keep getting up and doing the work when the people who were supposed to be on your side had decided they weren't. Piper was at the kitchen table when he got home, doing the homework she had put off until after dinner. The arithmetic she found less interesting than the drawing she had also done, and when he came through the door she looked up briefly, assessed that he was there and in one piece, and went back to the arithmetic. He made tea. He helped her check the arithmetic when she was done. He read with her until bedtime, the book about a girl who found a lighthouse that didn't appear on any maps, and when she was asleep, he sat at the kitchen table for a while with the tea and did not quite think about anything in particular, but did not quite not think about anything either. 2 days after that, on a morning when he was finishing early on 7 and had started on 14 ahead of schedule, he was doing a routine check on the corridor lighting sensor near her office. A quick job. 5 minutes. He would have been done and gone before she noticed him. Except that he paused. He paused because her right foot moved. She was at her desk, weight shifted forward, reaching for a document at the far edge of the surface, and her right foot, pressed against the footrest of the chair, flexed. Her toes pressed down, her ankle angled slightly inward, and for less than 2 seconds her foot did something deliberate. Something initiated. Not a spasm, not a random reflex. Not the kind of passive tremor he had learned to distinguish from intentional movement in 12 years of working with equipment that sometimes did things it wasn't supposed to be doing. This was the opposite of that. This was a system doing something it was supposed to be able to do, and had been doing quietly in the background, while everyone else had concluded it couldn't. He went back to the sensor. He replaced it and wrote the note in his log, and went down to check the floor below. He did not say anything to her about her foot. It was her body and her medical situation, and Dr. Marsh had already noted what she had seen, and what Margaret did with that information was her decision. What he could do was make sure the building around her was as functional as it should be. He adjusted the accessible exit corridor to better lighting. He calibrated the door sensors on the east entrance so they had faster response. He checked the elevator's accessible button panel and submitted a service call on one button that had developed a slight lag. Small things. The wrong way cost someone later. The right way was just the right way. 3 weeks after the doorway conversation, he arrived on a Tuesday to find a note on the mechanical room door. Her handwriting, which he had learned from the formal work orders she submitted through Theo, and which looked different here, a little faster, less formal. The ventilation unit in Conference Room B has been cycling strangely for 3 days. Probably a belt. I told Theo not to submit a work order because I thought you'd be up here Wednesday anyway. M. L. He checked the belt. She was right about the cause. He fixed it in 35 minutes. He folded the note into his back pocket. That evening, he put it in the small drawer in his kitchen where he kept things without fully examining why, alongside Piper's first day of school photograph from 2 years ago and the ticket stub from the Pacers game he and Kara had gone to the week before she got sick, and the keys to his old truck that had died 4 years ago and that he had never gotten around to taking off the key ring. He had a conversation with Theo toward the end of that week. The kind of conversation that happened between people who occupied the same space regularly and had discovered they were both paying quiet attention to the same things. "She's been here every day this week," Theo said. He said it without preamble, the way he said most things, standing in the break room, making the espresso that was the one indulgence of his very indulgent free workday. Until 10 or 11 every night. He didn't ask what that meant. He already knew what it meant. "The filing deadline for the hearing submissions is in 2 weeks," Theo said. He poured his own coffee and went back to work. He told himself he had no reason to be tracking these things. He was the maintenance supervisor for the building's facilities. He fixed what broke. That was the work. Everything else was information he happened to have and had no particular use for. He thought about Evaluation 11 and the blank attachment field on page 47. He thought about the 2 different words, pending and complete, and the 2 versions of the same document. He went back to the mechanical room on 14 and started on the quarterly check he had been scheduling around and had been putting off for a week. She appeared in the doorway 40 minutes later, not with a purpose, or at least not one she named, just standing there with a mug in her hand and the look of someone who had been in meetings for 3 hours and needed 60 consecutive seconds without another person asking them to decide something. He kept working. She stood there for a while, not making conversation, just standing. He had learned in the past weeks that she was not a person who needed silence filled, that she found it acceptable to be in the same room as another person without speaking, which was rarer than it sounded and more comfortable than he had expected. After a few minutes, she said, "Owen wasn't always like this." He didn't look up. "We started this company together on a handshake and an 18-page business plan and a genuine belief that we were building something that mattered," she said. "For 8 years, that belief was the most honest thing I had." She paused. "He loved this company. I've never doubted that. What he didn't understand," he said, "is that you did too." She looked at him. "Yeah," she said. "That's exactly it." She finished the mug and set it on the work table at the edge of the room and went back to her office. He finished the quarterly check. That evening, standing in the lobby on his way out, he ran into Owen Hargrove for the first time. Owen was coming through the security doors from the street, alone, moving through the lobby with the ease of someone who had decided he belonged everywhere he went. He was 61 years old, broad-shouldered, silver-haired, wearing a coat that fit too well to be anything but expensive. He had the look of a man who had spent 4 decades being the most senior person in most rooms, and had accepted this as simply the natural state of things. He glanced at Daniel as he passed. "You're the maintenance supervisor," he said. "Hallmark Facilities." "Yes, I had a conversation with your company's regional manager last week." Owen's voice was pleasant in the way that professional pleasantness was practiced until it became second nature. "We're doing a vendor review. Reassessing contracts across our tenant portfolio." He held Owen's gaze evenly. He understood what was being communicated. He had encountered this kind of pressure before in different forms. The project manager who mentioned budget constraints right after a conflict with a crew member, the property owner who suddenly had concerns about a contractor's quality of work the week after a disagreement about timeline. "Happy to discuss any service concerns through the proper channels," he said. "My manager's name is Kim Park. I can pass along your contact information." Owen's expression didn't change. He went to the elevator. Daniel went out to the street and stood in the evening air for a moment, processing the exchange. The cost of the wrong installation. The way it showed up later in a form you weren't expecting. He called Kim Park that evening and gave her the conversation word for word. She said she had received the inquiry from Owen's office and found it unusual. The contract was fine for now. Document anything that feels like pressure. He documented it. He filed it. He didn't tell Margaret. She had enough. The board meeting on the 21st was the first time he saw all four of them together. He was not supposed to be on 14 that day. His schedule had him on 7 and 8, but the stuck damper on the 14th floor ventilation system, the one that had taken 2 hours in the 5th week, had reset itself to the stuck position overnight and required a follow-up that morning. He came up in the service elevator and was in the mechanical room when he heard them arrive. He could hear voices in the conference room, which was not usual. The soundproofing was good, which meant they were not trying to keep the volume contained, which meant the meeting had a different quality than usual. He stayed in the mechanical room with the door closed and worked on the damper and tried not to track the quality of what he was hearing. He learned later from Theo, who offered information the way a good building offered utilities, reliably and without being asked, that the meeting had been Owen's idea and had been framed as a quarterly governance review, which was its proper name, but which had been used to table a motion about executive reporting requirements that would have, if passed, required Margaret to submit weekly operational summaries to the full board for review. The motion had been presented as a transparency measure. She had tabled it by asking Owen to clarify which specific operational concern motivated the proposal, and then waiting, without filling the silence, until the silence itself had done its work. The motion was tabled without being voted on. He looked at Theo when Theo finished telling him this. "She's very good at silence," Theo said. "It's one of her most effective tools." He had noticed that. He thought about page 22. About the strategy of a motion that framed oversight as transparency, the specific elegance of it, the way it could be opposed on philosophical grounds or accepted and then used against you. He thought about the man who had constructed it, Owen, who had built something real, who had loved this company, who had arrived at a place where his love for the company and his sense of what it needed had become the same as his belief that she couldn't provide it, and who would not be moved from that position by argument, only by something that made the argument impossible. Page 22, and the two different words, was that thing. He thought about this on his way to the 3rd floor, where the east stairwell door had tripped the alarm again. She told him about the accident on a Thursday afternoon in late April. Not the facts of it, he knew the facts from the file, but the interior of it, the version she had been keeping in the place where the facts couldn't reach. He was checking a slow drain in the accessible restroom near her office. A routine issue, 10 minutes of work. She appeared in the doorway with the look of someone who had been building up to something for a while and had decided the building up was over. It was June, she said, without any opening, as if they were continuing a conversation they had been having for some time. Company retreat. The Dunes, Michigan, we had a property that bordered the lake. He kept working. The last morning, before we were supposed to drive back, I went out to the dock before anyone else was awake. She was speaking to the middle distance, not to him exactly. More like she was saying it out loud for the first time, and he happened to be in the room where it was being said. I dove off the end. I'd done it the year before. The water was warm enough. He stopped working and looked at her. I went in wrong. The angle. She said it simply. My back hit the bottom, and I was looking up through the water, and I couldn't understand what was happening. I could see the dock and the light through the water, and I couldn't understand why nothing in the lower half of my body was working. He looked at her. She was looking at the wall above his head. 3 years later, and the water is still the first thing I remember when I wake up in the morning. She said, not what happened after, just the water. He thought about Kara, about the sound of her breathing the last morning, the specific rhythm of it, the way it had changed, about the quality of sounds that became permanent before you could decide whether you wanted them to. Sometimes the thing that changes everything, he said, is the most ordinary moment you've ever been in. She looked at him then. For a long moment. He went back to the drain. She stood in the doorway for a while longer. Then she said, I was engaged. Before the accident. For 8 months after he stayed. Then he didn't. He waited. She touched the armrest of the chair. He didn't leave because I was in the chair. He had already been leaving. The chair just gave him the geometry of it. She said it with the flatness of someone who had processed this so many times that the processing itself was now the fact, the original wound a layer beneath. He understood what she meant. Sometimes the thing that broke a structure was already cracked before the force hit it. The force just found the crack. There's a photo, she said. In the file somewhere. I don't know if you saw it. He had. Third page, paper clip to the medical intake form. A woman standing on a mountain summit, arms extended, face turned up to a sky that was the specific blue of a day that has decided to be its own best version. She was laughing in the way that happened to a face when the moment exceeded what you had planned for it. I saw it, he said. She nodded. I was going to leave it out of the copy Owen's team received. She looked at the window, and then I forgot. She was quiet for a moment. It's from 2 weeks before the accident. He thought about the woman in that photograph, the angle of her, the ease of it. She's still there, he said. She looked at him sharply. The sharpness had something underneath it. Both of you, he said. She's still in the room. She looked away. A long moment passed. I have the reclassification evaluation scheduled with Dr. Marsh for next Thursday, she said. He nodded. I don't know what she'll find. She said it carefully, weighing each word. She's already found more than anyone looked for before. But I've had 11 evaluations that concluded the same thing. And I've had 3 years of building a life that assumed they were right. How long until you know? 6 weeks for full imaging. Maybe faster if the preliminary results are clear. The hearing is in 4 weeks, she said. He did the math again. Tight, still possible. One thing at a time, he said. She looked at him. For a moment, the expression on her face was something unguarded and immediate and not managed at all. The kind of expression a person's face made when it forgot to perform and just was. Then, it settled. Thank you, she said, for all of it, for coming back, both times. Don't thank me, he said. I just work in the building. She made a sound that was almost a laugh. Small, brief, real, he went back to the drain. That evening he helped Piper with a reading comprehension assignment about a girl who discovered a message in a bottle on a beach and had to decide whether to find the person who sent it. The story was written for children and had a tidy conclusion that Piper found implausible. He doesn't know if the person even wants to be found, she said. Maybe they sent it because they needed to say something, not because they needed someone to come. He thought about that for a while after she was asleep. The setback came in the 3rd week of May. He learned about it the way he learned most things on 14, not from the source but from the texture of the aftermath, the particular quality of silence that followed a blow when the people inside it were still absorbing what had happened and hadn't decided yet what to do about it. He was running his Tuesday checks when Theo intercepted him in the main corridor. Theo was carrying a tablet he wasn't looking at and walking at a pace slightly faster than his usual pace and slightly slower than the pace he actually wanted to be moving at. The compromise of someone managing something. Is there anything you need on this floor today? Theo asked. Anything that requires access to the main offices or the conference rooms? One thing on the exterior vents on the south wall. 20 minutes. Okay, he paused. Do you want coffee while you're up here? Daniel looked at him. Sure. Theo brought back 2 cups from the kitchen and stood in the corridor with his and said, without looking directly at Daniel, Nortec pulled their contract this morning. 7:30. Owen sent a message to the board at 8, suggesting it confirmed his operational concerns. Daniel took the coffee. She built that contract, Theo said. 18 months. 3 rounds of negotiation. She flew to Chicago twice, and Houston once, and Denver once, and she did every call from here, from this floor. $4,200,000 on year 1. He looked at his coffee cup. She found out on her way in this morning. She's been in her office since 9. He drank the coffee. You don't have to say anything, Theo said. Sometimes it helps to say it out loud to someone who's outside it. He finished the south wall vents. Both were functioning. He logged them and went down to 12 and did the check there, and when he came back through 14 on his way out, he stopped in the corridor outside her office. Through the glass panel beside the door, he could see her at her desk, back to the window, the legal pad in front of her, pen moving. The photograph from the file propped against the corner of her monitor. She had put it there sometime in the past few weeks, in the spot where the mountain photograph had always lived in the before version of her office that he only knew from the picture. She was writing. Not paused, not staring. Writing, he went to the elevator. He got off at the lobby and ran into Owen Hargrove coming through the security doors. Owen looked at him with the brief appraisal of a man tracking which obstacles were in his path. "You're still here," he said. "The maintenance fellow. Still here," he said. "I trust you saw my message to Kim Park this week about the service review." Owen's voice was even and pleasant and deliberate. "I did. Kim mentioned it. Good, I want to make sure we're all aligned." Owen went to the elevator. He went out to the street and stood in the May afternoon and thought about alignment. About the two different meanings of that word. The mechanical meaning, everything in its correct position, and the social meaning, which was often the opposite of that. He called Kim Park from his truck. Gave her the update. "Document it," she said. "He's trying to manage your proximity to her, which means he knows you know something. Keep doing exactly what you're doing." He documented it. He went home. The following Tuesday she appeared in the mechanical room doorway at 3:30, the same doorway as the first time, the same hour, as though some part of their dynamic had found a rhythm without anyone deciding to establish one. He was reorganizing the access panel logs. He set them down. She came in and sat in the chair beside the door that he had placed there 3 weeks ago, because the room was easier to talk in when you weren't standing in the middle of it. "The Nortec contract," she said. "I heard. 4.2 million, first year alone." She said it without inflection, reading the fact into the record before dealing with what the fact meant. When it pulls, it looks exactly like what Owen has been saying. That I can't maintain the kind of stability the company needs. He waited. He went to them. She said. Owen, before they sent the notice, he went to their procurement team and said there was instability in our leadership structure. He didn't lie. He just chose the truth that did the most work for him. He waited. She put her hands flat on her knees. "I built that company with him." She said it quietly, without anger, the way you said things that were simply true and also hurt. 5 years in the same rooms. Same problems. Same decisions. I know his handwriting and which arguments he makes when he's scared and which ones he makes when he's confident, and they're different arguments. She looked at Daniel. How do you go from building something together to... She stopped. That's not what I'm asking. What are you asking? She was quiet for a moment, looking at the conduit he had rerouted in April, the one that had been done wrong. I've been telling myself Owen is afraid, she said, that he made a decision about me after the accident, and he's holding on to it because changing it would mean admitting he was wrong about someone he knew for 15 years. And that's probably true. But it's not the whole thing. He waited. She said, slowly and flatly, I've been running from the possibility that he might be partly right. Not about my competence. I know I can do this job. I do this job every day. But about whether I've actually dealt with what needs dealing with. He looked at her. I went to that dock because I was exhausted. She said, 8 months of running at full speed after the accident, no rest. No concession to what my body was doing, no acknowledgement that I was operating at about 60% and pretending it was 100. She was looking at the floor between them. And when I hit the water, for 1 second, before I understood what was happening, the thought I had was how much easier it would be to just stay down. He was very still. That's not why I'm in this chair. She said immediately, I came up. I've always come up. But the thought was there. And I've never said that out loud. To anyone. Because saying it out loud means sitting with what it means, and I haven't been willing to sit with it. He thought about what to say, and then said the thing that was simply, completely true. You came up. He said. She looked at him. You came up. He said again. That morning and every morning since. I've watched you do it on this floor for 2 months. Whatever you were carrying to that dock, you put it down when you surfaced. She looked at him steadily. My wife. He said, when we got the diagnosis, the first thing I felt, before the fear, for 1 second, just one, was relief. She was very still. I recognized it immediately. He said, I have never said that out loud either. I thought about what it meant about me for a year afterward. What did it mean? He had spent enough time with this question that he knew the answer. That I was human, he said. That I was tired. That caring for someone that much for that long takes something out of you that doesn't replace itself on its own. He looked at his hands and then at her. It didn't mean I loved her less. It meant I had nothing left. And when something tells your body the carrying is almost over, the body responds before the heart can stop it. She was looking at the floor between them. You're human, he said. Not broken, not damaged, not less than what you were. Human, and you came up. The silence that followed was long and had weight. Not uncomfortable. Full, she said quietly. The reclassification evaluation is next week. He nodded. Doctor, Marsh thinks there's something to find. She said it the way she said things she hadn't fully decided how to feel about yet. I don't know what it means. I've had 11 evaluations that all found the same thing. But she says the preliminary imaging is different. Let her look, he said. That's all you have to do right now. She looked at him. For a moment, her expression was the one she had when something got past the managed version of her face. The unguarded one. The real one. Then it settled. She went back to her office. He locked the mechanical room and went down to his truck and drove home and made dinner and helped Piper with a geography assignment about the Great Lakes, which Piper had strong feelings about because she felt Lake Michigan was underrepresented relative to Lake Superior in most educational materials. He agreed that it was. They spent 20 minutes looking at maps. 3 days later, Owen made his next move. The competency hearing was already on record with the court. Owen's legal team filed a motion to accelerate the timeline, citing what they described as material deterioration of client relationships, the Nortec withdrawal, as evidence that delay would cause further harm. The motion asked the court to advance the hearing by 2 weeks, which put it at 3 weeks away, which meant Dr. Marsh's reclassification evaluation had to be complete and submitted in a window that had just collapsed to almost nothing. Margaret called him at 8:17 in the evening. He was at the kitchen table helping Piper with a math problem she had been circling for 40 minutes. The kind of problem that made sense once you understood the notation and was impenetrable until you did. He excused himself to the hallway. She said, "The hearing is in 3 weeks." She was talking at the pace she reserved for thinking under time pressure, fast and precise and unhurried at the same time, the way a skilled person moved quickly. "Doctor, Marsh can submit a preliminary report, but only if she has something definitive to report on. And the missing page, the Marsh note, I've been working out how to use it. If I submit it as evidence of deliberate omission, Owen's team will argue it was a clerical error. They might even be right. I can't prove intent unless what?" She was quiet for a brief moment. Unless the version of the brief Owen submitted to the board, not the court, the board, lists evaluation 11 as pending. And the February draft he sent me during our initial negotiations lists it as complete, and those are on record. In my email. Since February. He thought about this. You have the February version. In my inbox. Yes, I never deleted it. And the board submitted version says pending. Yes, he thought about the conduit. The wrong installation. Pending and complete are different words. They can't both be right. No, she said. They can't. She was quiet for a moment. I need to build a comparison for the board in the next 72 hours, she said. Show them the two versions side by side. And I need Dr. Marsh's preliminary findings in the same window. All of this while Owen is arguing that I can't manage operational stress. He looked back at the kitchen where Piper was still working at the table, her tongue at the corner of her mouth, pencil moving. I'll be at the building early tomorrow, he said. I have an access panel job on 14 that's been on my schedule for 2 weeks. I'll be there by 7. A pause. You don't have to, she said. I know, he said. Piper came to the building on a Friday. He hadn't planned it. Her school had a professional development day, a Wednesday email, the late kind, the kind that arrived after every parent had already made their week's arrangements. His neighbor, Mrs. Okafor, was unavailable. The job on 14 couldn't move again without creating problems downstream that would cost him more time than the original scheduling had saved. He called ahead. Theo, not Margaret, because that was the right order of operations, and he was a person who cared about order of operations. Theo said, I'll let her know. He was quiet for a moment. I think that will be fine. He told Piper in the truck, "We're going to my work building. You're going to sit in the room they set up for you, and you're going to draw or read, and you're going to be quiet when people are working." He had said a version of this 3 times on the way over, and Piper had nodded each time with the patient expression of a person who is managing someone they love. She had her yellow jacket, her backpack, and the drawing kit she had added without him noticing until they were already out of the parking lot. Ron gave her a visitor badge and showed her where to sign her name. She signed it carefully, with all the letters. She looked at the badge for a moment afterward and seemed satisfied. On 14, Theo had set up the small conference room adjacent to the main office. A chair, a clean table, a glass of water, a bowl of the small crackers from the break room. "This is perfect," Piper said, assessing it with genuine judgment. Theo looked pleased in the particular way of someone who had put thought into something and had the thought acknowledged. Daniel went to do his work. He was replacing a junction in the mechanical room, a 2-hour job, clean and methodical, and he moved through it without looking at the clock. He heard Piper from down the hallway occasionally, not loudly, just present, the ambient sound of a child engaged with something, pencil on paper, the soft turn of a page. He was finishing when she appeared in the doorway. "I want to see what you fixed," she said. He showed her. She looked at it with the focused inventory she gave things she was genuinely curious about, head tilted slightly. "That's what was wrong. That's what was wrong. Did you know before you opened it?" "I had a pretty good idea, but you have to look to be sure." She considered this. Then she said, "There's a lady in a wheelchair down the hall." He kept his hands on the panel. "That's the CEO of the company that rents this floor. She talks to the assistant like he's a person. Most people talk to Theo like he's a person. No, Piper was matter of fact. They talk to him like he's a list of things they need done. She says the things, but she also talks to him about other things." He handed her his work gloves to carry, which was the job he gave her at his sites. She held them with both hands, important cargo. He went to Theo's desk to let him know he was wrapping up. Theo was outside Margaret's office. Margaret was at her desk through the glass panel, on the phone making notes. She glanced up when Daniel appeared. He held up 5 fingers. 5 minutes. She nodded and went back to the call. He turned and found Piper had followed him and was now standing in Margaret's open office doorway. Margaret had just finished the call. He started toward the doorway to redirect her, but Margaret was already looking at Piper, and Piper was already speaking. "I like your office," she said. "It's organized, but not in a nervous way. Some people organize things because they're nervous about them. This looks like you just know where everything is." Margaret looked at her. She looked at Daniel in the doorway and then back at Piper. "That's accurate," she said. "What's your name?" "Piper Carr." "I'm Margaret. Are you here to fix something too?" "My dad fixed the thing in the mechanical room. I'm just here because there's no school today." Margaret moved her chair slightly, the practiced ease of it, and Piper watched the way Piper watched machines, taking information, not performing attention. "Does your office go to the window?" Piper asked. "It does." "Can you see?" "Far. Pretty far." "Can I see?" "Piper," Daniel said. Margaret looked at him briefly. "It's fine." Piper went to the window and stood with both hands on the glass. She looked out at Indianapolis with the concentrated attention she gave things that mattered to her. The construction crane 2 blocks south, the river catching afternoon light. The streets going out in 3 directions until the horizon went soft. "That's a lot," she said. "It is," Margaret said. "Does it feel like yours?" Piper turned around. "When you look at it, does it feel like it's yours?" Margaret looked at her. The question had a quality that wasn't naive. It was direct in the way of someone asking what they actually wanted to know. "Yes," she said. "Every morning. I want something like that someday," Piper said. "When I'm older." "You will." Margaret said it with certainty. Piper moved back from the window. She looked at the photograph on the desk, the mountain summit, the blue sky, the woman with her arms out. She picked it up without asking, which made Daniel start forward, but Margaret made a small gesture. Not to him. More like a decision she was making for herself. Piper studied the photograph the way she studied drawings she was trying to learn from. "Is this you?" she asked. Yes, you were standing. Yes, Piper set the photograph back carefully, in exactly the spot it had been. You look like you, she said. Except you also look like how you look now. So both of them are you. The same person. Margaret looked at the photograph. I know, she said. I'm getting better at knowing that. Piper retrieved her drawing kit from the backpack she had been carrying this whole time, opened the spiral-bound pad to a clean page, and sat down in the chair across from the desk. Can I draw you? Margaret looked at the kit. At Piper. At Daniel. He shrugged honestly. She does this. Okay, Margaret said. She sat for it with the same composure she brought to everything. Piper drew. The drawing took 18 minutes. Daniel had one more thing to finish on 11, and he went down and came back, and Piper was still drawing, and Theo had appeared at some point and placed 2 glasses of water near them without disturbing either person. And Margaret had picked up a document and was annotating it in the red ink way she did everything, which seemed to satisfy some balance that Piper required. She drew better when her subjects were doing something rather than just sitting. When she finished, she turned the pad around. Margaret looked at the drawing for a long time. It was not technically accomplished. Piper was 7 years old and had not yet worked out proportions or perspective, but the attention in it was completely real. She had drawn the desk and the window and the photograph propped at the corner of the monitor, and she had drawn Margaret in the chair, and she had gotten something essentially right about it. Not the anatomy, the position. Centered, direct, like the office organized itself around her presence rather than the other way around. You put the photo in, Margaret said. It's important, Piper said. You look at it when you're thinking about something hard. I noticed that while I was drawing. Margaret was quiet. She had the expression she sometimes had when something got past the managed version of her face before she had decided whether to let it. Can I keep it? Margaret asked. I was going to give it to you, Piper said. I draw things for the people who have them when I go somewhere, so the thing knows it was drawn. She took a pencil from the kit and signed the bottom right corner in her careful handwriting, Piper Car. Daniel looked at the window. Margaret set the drawing next to the photograph, the two of them side by side. She looked at both. She said to Daniel, "She's something." He cleared his throat. Yeah, Piper was already packing the kit. Efficient movements. Task completed. She slung the backpack over one shoulder. I liked meeting you, she told Margaret. I hope the building thing gets better. Margaret looked at her. What building thing? Piper gestured at the hallway, the floor, the general air of the space, whatever is making the people here worried. It's like the building is holding something it doesn't know how to let go of. Dad says buildings hold the feelings of the people in them. He did not say that. Daniel said. You say it all the time. Piper said without looking at him. Margaret's expression did something that was not quite a smile, but was the thing immediately adjacent to one. I hope it gets better too, she said. Thank you for the drawing, Piper. Piper nodded and went back to the conference room. The rest of the afternoon settled. Piper drew. Daniel worked. Margaret was in calls. When he came past in the hallway at 4 o'clock, she was standing in the corridor. Standing. Her hands on the frame of the door to the supply room, using it for balance, which was something he had seen her do in the corridor before when she was doing the standing exercises Dr. Marsh had apparently prescribed, and she looked at him and said nothing, and he said nothing, and he went on down the hall. He came back up at 5:30 to collect Piper and found her in the break room with Theo, who had apparently been explaining the operation of the espresso machine in some detail while she observed with scientific seriousness. Does she actually understand how it works? Margaret asked from the doorway. She told me the grind calibration is off by about 3 degrees, Theo said, based on the sound. I think she's right. Piper looked pleased in the way she looked pleased when she had correctly identified something. The espresso machine conversation lasted longer than Daniel expected. He came back from 11 to find Piper and Theo deep in a discussion about extraction pressure that had apparently started as Theo explaining how the machine worked, and evolved into Piper asking increasingly specific questions about why the machine was calibrated the way it was, questions that Theo was answering with genuine engagement, because he was a person who gave full attention to things, and Piper was a person who responded to full attention by going deeper. She told me what she thinks is wrong with the grind setting, Theo said when Daniel appeared. In detail. She wants to know if we can adjust it. Daniel looked at his daughter. She had her notebook out. I wrote down the numbers, Piper said. So we can test it before and after. Margaret, who had appeared in the break room doorway without him noticing, looked at the notebook and then at Theo. She's right about the calibration, Margaret said. I've thought that for months. Theo looked slightly wounded that this had not been mentioned. I would have adjusted it. I didn't want to be the CEO who complains about the espresso machine calibration, she said. It seemed like a bad look. Piper looked between them. It's not the CEO's machine, she said. It's everybody's machine. If it's wrong, it's wrong. Margaret looked at her for a long moment. You're right, she said. Theo, please adjust the calibration. Theo made a note in his tablet with the expression of a man who had learned something today about the information his CEO was choosing not to share with him. Piper closed her notebook with satisfaction. In the truck on the way home, she said, Theo is very good at his job. He is. Daniel agreed. He really wants to help. But sometimes people don't let you help because they don't want to seem like they need it. She was looking out the window. That's a waste. She paused. He needs to know things so he can do his job. And she needs him to know things. But she's protecting him from knowing things by not telling him, which doesn't actually protect him, it just means he has less information, which makes his job harder. He looked in the rearview mirror. I'm just saying, Piper said. He drove. Did she get the thing you found on the bus? Piper asked. Yes, good. Lost things should go back to who they belong to. In the truck on the way home, Piper was quiet for a while initially, and then not quiet at all. I think she's nice, she said. She can be. The worried feeling in the building is because someone's trying to take something from her. He looked in the rearview mirror. Did someone tell you that? No, Piper was watching the city go by outside the window. It's the same feeling as when the Garcias were moving out and the whole hallway smelled different for a week. When something that belongs somewhere might not stay there. He drove. Did she get the thing you found on the bus? Piper asked. Yes, he said. She got it back. Good, Piper said simply. Lost things should go back to who they belong to. He thought about that for the rest of the drive. About files and missing pages and the ways things could be lost quietly in small increments and the ways the same things could be found. The 3 evenings he spent with Margaret working on the comparison document were the most sustained collaborative work he had done alongside another person since Carl was well. Not emotionally. Logistically, Margaret had given him access to the conference room on 14. Theo had cleared the schedule, and Daniel had brought his laptop and the documentation he had been quietly organizing since the day he first noticed the discrepancy on page 12. They went through the brief side by side, the February version she had forwarded from her email archive, and the version that had been submitted to the board, page by page. He was not a lawyer, but he was meticulous, and meticulous was what the work needed. He built a comparison document with 3 columns: February version, board submission, difference noted and flagged. There were 9 points of divergence. Owen's team would argue 7 of them were standard drafting evolution, language refined, structure tightened, the normal changes between an early draft and a final version. 7 of those 9 were probably exactly that. 2 were not. Page 22. The paragraph describing the clinical basis for the competency claims cited evaluations 1 through 10. The February version listed evaluation 11, Dr. Marsh's report, as complete, current, and included in the appendix. The board submission listed it as pending, not yet available. Page 47. The February version's attachment slot for evaluation 11 contained a placeholder note, Marsh report attached per discussion March 15. The board submission contained a blank field, pending and complete. 2 different factual states. Only one of them could be accurate. She read the comparison document at midnight on the second night, sitting across from him at the conference table with the city dark outside the window and the building quiet around them. This is what it is, she said. Yeah, he won't be able to explain page 22. She said it without satisfaction, just identifying what was true. He agreed. She looked at the document for another moment. Then she looked at him. "You've been here every evening this week," she said. The hours had been what they were, Piper asleep by 8:30. The evenings long and available. "You have a daughter," she said. "She's asleep by the time I start," he said. She was quiet. "I was going to be a structural engineer," he said, "before I changed tracks into facilities management. Same skills, different scale. Why did you change?" He thought about how to answer this honestly. His daughter's mother had been sick. The engineering track required graduate school and long hours and travel, and he had chosen differently. Life required a different kind of building, he said. She looked at him across the conference table with the papers between them and the city dark outside. "This is also building," she said. He nodded. "Why does it feel like you're doing it with me and not for me?" He considered this. "Because you're building it," he said. "I'm handing you materials." She was quiet for a moment. "Then, I'd like you to be there." At the hearing, he looked at her. "Not formally, not as anything with a role. Just, I'd like you to be in the building that day." "I'll be in the building," he said. She went back to the document. After a few minutes, she said, "Owen isn't going to come apart under questioning. He's too experienced for that. I know. But the board will see the two versions, and the board chair will ask him about page 22. He nodded. "And he won't have an answer that holds." She said it like something she had been working out over a long distance and had finally arrived at. She made a note. He kept working. They finished at 1:30 in the morning. She walked him to the elevator, and they stood in the corridor, the building quiet at that hour, the ventilation running at its lower nighttime setting, the building doing what buildings did when everyone had left, maintaining itself, keeping the systems running, holding the temperature steady through the night for people who would come back in the morning and expect everything to be in order. She said, "I had a conversation with Dr. Marsh today. The preliminary imaging is back." He waited. She said she sees more than she expected. She said it carefully, weighing each word before it was committed to the air. "I don't know what to do with that." "You don't have to do anything with it yet," he said. She looked at the elevator doors. "I've been in this chair for 3 years, and I've never once looked at it as a temporary condition. I've looked at it as the condition, the one that is mine now." He thought about Kara. About the year when permanent had started to feel like a fact he was learning to speak as a first language, not a translation. "There's a difference," he said, "between accepting where you are and deciding where you're staying." She looked at him. "Let Dr. Marsh look," he said. "Let Dr. Osei look when she refers you. What they find is what we work with." "We." He held her gaze. "Yeah," he said. She looked at him for a long time. Long enough to be a decision. Then she pressed the elevator button. The doors opened. He got in. She looked at him as the doors closed. Not the managed version. Not the CEO. Just her, at 1:30 in the morning, in a building that was doing its job. The hearing was on a Thursday. He was at Meridian Center by 7. He had written up a legitimate maintenance task to justify the visit. The accessible entrance sensor on 14 had been trending slightly slow on its response interval, which was accurate, and which he attended to at 7:15 with the focused attention of someone doing something small, because the large thing was not in his hands. He checked the corridor lighting on the accessible route. He confirmed the conference room equipment was powered and functioning. He made sure every door on the floor that was in his purview was working the way it was supposed to work. He did all of this slowly and carefully, which was how he did everything. He did not see Margaret before the hearing began at 9. He sat in the lobby. He had his maintenance report open on his phone. He was not reading it. Ron at the security desk was respecting this with the professional discretion of someone who had seen many things over 11 years and had a policy about which ones he noticed. He sat there for 1 hour and 37 minutes. He thought about the file on the bus, the way it had been sitting in the gap between the seat and the wall at an angle that put the top page in his line of sight, the way almost leaving it had been the obvious thing to do, and the obvious thing had not been the right thing. He thought about the envelope in the transit office, and Terrence pouring himself a coffee. and the 3 paragraphs on the single folded page. He thought about the specific words on page 12 and page 47 and page 22, about the difference between pending and complete. He thought about 8 seconds, about what 8 seconds could mean as a starting number. He sat in that lobby for 1 hour and 37 minutes, and he thought about the bus, and he thought about the file, and he thought about the specific sequence of things, the wrong angle on page 47, the 2 different words on page 12, the envelope under the seat, the note from Dr. Marsh in 3 paragraphs, the foot that had moved. He thought about all the ways a thing could be almost lost. The way a file could sit under a seat for an entire route and be swept up and discarded at the end of the day, and no one would have known it was there. The way a clinical note could sit in an attachment field of a legal brief as a blank line, and the hearing could proceed, and a decision could be made, and the blank line would be explained as standard administrative lag. The way a person could be told, with enough authority and enough precision, that a certain door was closed, and could rebuild their entire understanding of the available space around that door being closed, and it might take 11 evaluations over 3 years and a maintenance supervisor on a Tuesday bus route to open it again. He thought about Kara, about the year after her diagnosis, when he had understood that there were 2 possible futures and had been living in the space between them, and about how much easier it would have been to simply accept the worse one rather than hold the space for both. About Piper, who had been 5 years old and who had needed him to hold that space, and who was now 7, and who drew portraits of everyone she met and kept careful records of things she thought were worth documenting. He thought about 8 seconds as a starting number, about what starting numbers became. Ron at the security desk had not looked at Daniel directly in 40 minutes, which was a form of professional solidarity he appreciated. He took the bus home that night and thought about page 22 the whole ride, about the 2 different words, about the specific effort required to change one word to another in a document, to go into the document and find the cell and alter the text, and about the question of whether that effort was deliberate or accidental, and about the fact that the answer to that question was less important than the fact of the change itself. A word had been changed. The word changed in a direction that benefited the argument being made. That was what the comparison document showed, and the comparison document didn't lie, and neither did the blank attachment field. He thought about what it meant to find a thing that others had missed. Not to find it in a heroic way, in the dramatic way of someone who had set out to find it. Just to find it because he had been paying attention and had enough experience to know that discrepancies in maintenance reports and discrepancies in legal briefs were the same category of problem dressed in different clothes. A thing that didn't match something else. A line that referred to an attachment that wasn't there. The wrong word where the right word should have been. He got off at his stop. He walked home in the April evening. The kind of evening where the city was doing exactly what cities did. Busy and lit and indifferent, and he was doing exactly what he always did. Walking home with his toolbox after a day of work, and nothing about either of those things was remarkable, except that he was also carrying in his head a comparison document and a missing page, and a woman who had stood for 8 seconds in her office that he had not yet seen, but would. Because the evaluation was next week, and the preliminary results had shown something, and Dr. Osei had already been called. He thought about 8 as a starting number. He thought about what Piper had said in the truck. Lost things should go back to who they belong to. He made dinner. He helped Piper with her homework, which tonight was a reading response about a character who had to decide whether to tell the truth about something that had happened when they were the only witness. Piper had strong feelings about this. The character should tell the truth, she said, because otherwise you're carrying something alone that doesn't have to be carried alone. She said this with the certainty of a 7-year-old who had not yet encountered a situation where the truth was more complicated than the telling. He agreed with her. He also thought she was right. He put her to bed at 8:30. He went back to his laptop and finished the formatting on the comparison document, which was going to Margaret in the morning. He made the visual display clean and navigable, the kind of document that told its own story, even if you weren't told to look for the story. He reviewed it twice. He found no errors. He sent it. He went to bed. He lay awake for a while the way he lay awake after days that had mattered. not anxiously, just with the full weight of things, the specific gravity of what was in motion, the particular quality of a night before something either resolved or didn't. He thought about Kara, about the year of holding the space between two futures, about Piper, who had been 5 and had needed someone to hold it, about the fact that holding that space was not the same as controlling what happened in it. You held the space. You did the work. And then you let the system do what systems did when they were properly maintained, which was to run. He fell asleep. The hearing was on a Thursday, and he was in the lobby by 7, and he did the door sensor and the corridor lighting and the equipment check, and then he sat in the lobby and he waited. And the waiting was its own kind of work, the kind that required you to be present without being active, which was harder than it sounded. He thought about all of it while he waited. The file, the envelope, the note from Dr. Marsh, the foot that had moved in the corridor on a Tuesday morning when she didn't know he was watching, the conduit that had been run wrong, and the cost that had been coming for 3 years. The 2 different words, pending, complete, 2 different states. Only one of them could describe what had actually happened, and the one that described what had actually happened was the one Owen had taken out of the document. He thought about what it meant to notice a thing, to really notice it, not to look at a file and say, probably nothing, and leave it under the seat, but to pick it up and read it, and go back for the envelope and read that too, and carry both of them back to the person whose name was on the cover and say, here is the thing that was missing. Here is what was actually there. That was the whole of it, he thought. That was the entire action, stripped down to its core. He had noticed, and he had returned, and he had read to the end. Everything else had followed from those 3 things. Ron at the security desk had been professionally not watching him for an hour and 20 minutes. Daniel appreciated this. At 10:40, the elevator opened, and Theo came out. He stood up. Theo walked toward him with the walk of someone who had been holding something carefully for a long time and was now setting it down with equal care. Page 22, Theo said. He waited. Owen's counsel stood up when the board chair asked about page 22. Theo said. He said it was a drafting error. He said the February version was an early working draft, and the board submission was the accurate final version. He said evaluation 11 had been listed as complete in February based on a miscommunication from Dr. Marsh's office that was subsequently corrected. He waited. The board chair asked Owen directly. Theo said. She asked why, if the error was in the February draft, the correction had produced the word pending, rather than simply removing evaluation 11 from the submission list. Because pending and complete are 2 different statements about a single factual situation. She asked which statement was accurate. He was quiet. Owen said he would need to consult with his legal team before responding to that specific question. The board chair said the hearing was paused pending his response. She then moved to the secondary agenda item, which was Dr. Marsh's preliminary report, Theo said. Submitted this morning. He said it steadily. She stated that the patient presents with residual motor pathway activity not previously identified in any prior evaluation, that the prior evaluations were conducted using protocols insufficient to capture the complete neurological picture, and that no competency determination should proceed until a full reclassification evaluation is complete. She said full results would be available in 6 weeks. The board chair approved the extension 40 minutes ago. Daniel sat down. Owen withdrew the motion to accelerate. Theo sat beside him. Neither of them spoke for a minute. She's still with them, Theo said. There are things they want to talk through. The path forward. The Nortex situation. What the company's positioning looks like now. He nodded. She asked me to come down as soon as there was something to tell you, Theo said. He sat with that. It was an hour later when the elevator opened and she came out. Legal pad in her lap, red ink on it, phone in her hand. She saw him from across the lobby and changed direction. He stood. She came to the chairs and stopped in front of him. The competency hearing is on hold, she said. Owen dropped the acceleration motion. Dr. Marsh's report is on the record. He nodded. Nortec called this morning. Before the hearing, she said. Their procurement director left a voicemail. They want to resume negotiations. Apparently, Owen's conversation with their team raised more concerns about his judgment than about my capacity. He thought about the wrong installation. About the cost that showed up later, always more than it would have been. She looked at him. She was reading his face. She said, "Doctor, Marsh called me during the break. The preliminary imaging shows enough that she wants to begin the full evaluation immediately. She has a slot next week. And she's already spoken with Dr. Osei. He said the imaging is consistent with incomplete classification. He said he's seen this before. He said there's work to do, but he wants to start." He kept his voice level. "What do you want?" She looked at the photograph in her hand. She had carried it down from the office. He hadn't seen her take it. The mountain summit. The blue sky. The woman with her arms out. "I want to know," she said. "I want to know what is actually there. Not what everyone concluded was there. What is actually there." "That's the right answer." She looked up at him. "Let Dr. Marsh look," he said. "Let Dr. Osei look. What they find is what we work with." He held her gaze. She looked at him for a long time. Then she placed the photograph on the arm of his chair. Deliberately, not on hers. On his. "Come up," she said. "I want to show you something." He followed her to the elevator. To 14. To her office with the afternoon light coming through the window and the city spread out behind her. She wheeled to the center of the room. "Stand over there," she said quietly. He moved to where she indicated, 5 feet from her chair. She placed both hands on the armrests. He was still. She pushed herself up. Slowly, the effort was visible in every part of her, both arms bearing the weight, the whole body working. And then her feet touched the floor, and she was standing. Unsteady, both hands still on the chair, but her feet on the floor. Her own weight on her own legs. He counted in his head. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. He looked at her for a long moment. She was not quite steady. Her hands were still on the armrests, still bearing some weight. Her breathing deliberate in the way of someone who was doing something that cost them everything and was not going to let you see all of what it cost. She was looking at him. Not with triumph. Not with the performed resolution he had sometimes seen when people demonstrated achievements they wanted acknowledged. She was looking at him the way she looked at things that were real and not yet fully categorized. He crossed the room slowly, not toward the chair, toward her. He stopped 2 feet away. She was standing, unsteady, hands on the chair, but standing, her weight on her own feet, her own legs holding her. He counted. 5, 6, 7, 8. She sat back down. He didn't say anything for a moment. Neither did she. 8 seconds. He said. 8, she said. Dr. Osei says we start counting from there. He looked at her. Then he looked at the photograph on the arm of his chair, the woman with her arms out on the mountain. He crossed the room and picked up the photograph and looked at it. Then he looked at her. "You're both there," he said. She looked at the photograph. "Yeah," she said. "Both of us." He put the photograph back on her desk, where it belonged, facing outward. She watched him do it. "Piper," she said. "Next time she comes, I want to show her." He thought about how Piper would respond to this information, with a seriousness that would look like joy and a precision that would look like seriousness. "She'll want the exact number," he said. 8 seconds. "She'll write it down." Margaret looked at the photograph. She straightened it slightly. She said, "I don't know what this is." He said, "You don't have to know yet." She looked at him. "What if I want to know?" He thought about the file he had found under the seat, about returning it, about going back for the envelope, about the 3 evenings and the comparison document and the long corridor conversations and the photograph that was now facing the window. "One thing at a time," he said. "Same way you do everything else." She was quiet for a moment. "Still here." She said it quietly, like a question she hadn't been sure she was going to ask. He heard it for what it was. "Yeah," he said. "Still here." There is a version of this story where the file is the beginning and the hearing is the end, and everything in between is the mechanics of how one led to the other. That version is accurate. It is just incomplete. The file was a document. 11 specialists had read parts of it. A board of directors had read the version they were given. A court had received the version with the word pending, where there should have been the word complete. What the file contained was not a verdict. What it contained was information that had been moving through the world for 3 years, looking for someone who would read it all the way to the end. A single father on a crosstown bus found it under his seat and read it. That is also accurate. But what Daniel Carr actually found was not a legal brief. What he found was a woman who had been told a story about herself with enough authority and enough repetition that she had built a life around it. A good life. A substantial life. A life that demonstrated every single day that the story was wrong in the ways that mattered most. And what she needed was not someone who would arrive and rewrite the story for her. What she needed was someone who would refuse to stop at page 46. He did not rescue her. She did not need rescuing. She needed a maintenance supervisor to notice that a conduit had been run wrong, and that the wrong installation cost someone later, and to decide that this cost was his business. He applied the same logic to a file on a bus seat and a missing page in an envelope. And a woman who had been running a company from a wheelchair for 3 years, and who had, somewhere in the machinery of her daily life, stopped expecting anyone to look carefully. The competency case was withdrawn 6 weeks after the hearing. Dr. Marsh's full evaluation was submitted, and Dr. Osei's intake assessment followed, and Owen Hargrove, who is not a villain in any clean sense of that word, who built something real alongside her and then made a decision about her future that was not his to make, and who made it because he loved the company and had convinced himself that protecting the company and protecting her were the same thing, resigned from the board without a statement. Margaret wrote him a letter. He did not respond. She had expected that, and she kept the letter anyway, because she meant what she said in it, that she understood why he had done what he did, and that understanding something and forgiving it were not incompatible, though they were also not the same. Nortec came back. The contract was renegotiated and came back improved. Daniel Carr's facilities contract was renewed without incident. He added the 14th floor to his regular Tuesday rotation. Dr. Osei called it the most complete recovery from an incomplete classification he had seen in a decade. 18 months of intensive work, of hard and unglamorous and nonlinear progress, of days when the body did less than it had done the week before, and there was no explanation, and you showed up anyway. 18 months later, Margaret Lawson walked into her company's 10th anniversary event on forearm crutches and walked out without them. The photograph from the mountain summit stayed on her desk, facing outward. Piper Carr drew a second portrait of her. And a third. The third one she signed with her full name and the year because she told her father, people will want to know when this was made. What this story is about is what happens when someone refuses to stop reading. Not the file, not the brief, not the document or the missing page or the blank attachment field. The person. The story she had been carrying. The version of her that everyone had accepted and filed away because it was easier than finishing what they had started. Daniel Carr sat down on a bus on a Tuesday morning, and he read a document and noticed a discrepancy, and went back for the missing page, and kept going back. Because in his line of work, you found the thing that was wrong, and you fixed it, not because it was dramatic, not because it made him anything, but because the wrong way cost someone later, and the cost always showed up, and it was always more than it had to be. He noticed a foot that moved. He noticed because he was paying attention. And he was paying attention because his job was to notice things that other people had decided were probably nothing. And he had learned over 12 years that probably nothing was a conclusion worth revisiting. Evaluation 11 was complete, not pending. The attachment field was blank because someone had made a choice to leave it blank. 2 different words, both of them pointing in the same direction. He returned a file. He read to the end. That is not a rescue. That is a person, refusing to set down something that everyone else had already decided wasn't worth carrying. Sometimes that is the whole work. The cost is just being willing to notice. And then, being willing to stay. Margaret Lawson and Daniel Carr did not decide what they were to each other until well after the hearing, well after the withdrawal of the motion. Well after the reclassification evaluation was underway and the preliminary results had been confirmed, and Dr. Ose had laid out the 18-month program that was, as he put it, not a guarantee, but a genuine possibility. And genuine possibility was something Margaret had been told for 3 years she did not have. They did not decide it dramatically. They did not have the conversation where they named it. What happened was simpler than that, and took longer than that. What happened was that she stopped managing him out of the close range of herself, and he stopped managing himself out of the close range of her. And what remained after that was just them, in the ordinary way, which is how most true things are. Piper knew before they did. She put the third portrait on her wall, the one she signed with the year, and she said to Daniel one evening when they were eating dinner that one is from when it started being a family. He asked her what she meant. She looked at him with the patience of someone who had already explained a thing once and was deciding whether to explain it again. The building worried feeling, she said, and then the feeling went away. That's when it started. He thought about that for a while. She's 7, he said. I know, Piper said. But I'm right. She was right. She usually was.